Nobody noticed what was happening in that stone hut. From the outside, it looked odd, squat heavy, built low into the hillside like something half-buried. The kind of structure a tired woman might throw together when her husband died and left her with 2 children, a claim, and winter coming fast. But inside was a different reality. Her name was Elisabeth Karnak, widow of a Czech stonemason, mother of 2, and according to most folks in the valley, completely out of her depth. When she started piling fieldstone into walls 18 inches thick, neighbors shook their heads. When she dug the foundation 3 feet down and laid a bed of gravel and sand beneath the floor, they called it desperate. And when she positioned the whole structure facing southeast with barely any windows on the north side, they just laughed. What did she understand about heat that an entire frontier community missed? Today, you're going to see how a woman everyone dismissed as foolish survived the deadliest winter in Montana history, while cabins all around her turned into frozen coffins. If you want to learn one survival technique every week that actually worked when lives depended on it, hit that subscribe button right now. And drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. I read every single one. Let's go back to November 1883. Elisabeth Karnak wasn't trying to prove anything. She was trying to survive. Her husband, Tomas, had been a master stonemason in Prague before they came west. He'd built ovens, foundations, entire churches from rock. He understood thermal mass the way most men understood timber. But a logging accident in the spring of 1883 left Elisabeth alone with Anna, age 7, and Joseph, age 4, on a 160-acre claim 8 miles from the nearest town. The cabin Tomas started before he died was half-finished. Log stacked, roof-framed, but no hearth, no chimney, no real plan for winter. Elisabeth had 2 choices: finish it the way everyone else did, or use what her husband had taught her about stone. She chose stone. The problem was immediate and concrete. Wood was scarce that high up. The wind came constant and cold from the northwest, cutting through log walls like they weren't there. Neighbors burned cords of pine just to keep a single room livable, and even then, children woke with frost on their blankets. Wetwood wouldn't light. Drywood burned too fast. Heat rose and disappeared. Floors stayed frozen. Elisabeth had watched this her first winter. She'd seen families go through 8 cords by February. She'd seen cabins where you could see your breath at noon, 3 feet from a fire. So when she started building, she built different. She dug the foundation deep, 3 feet down, and filled it with gravel for drainage and thermal stability. She laid fieldstone in thick double walls, 18 inches across, with a small air gap in between. The floor sat on compacted earth and sand, not elevated on joists where wind could steal heat from below. She built the main room small, just 14 by 16 feet, because Tomas had taught her that you heat mass, not space. The hearth sat in the center, not against a wall. Stone on all sides. A firebox just big enough for steady coals, not roaring flames. The chimney rose straight up through the roof, double-lined with clay and stone to hold heat longer. No wasted motion, no decoration, just function. Her children helped. Anna carried stones. Joseph mixed clay. They worked through September and into October, laying rock, packing joints, smoothing the interior walls with lime plaster. Neighbors saw it going up and didn't say much. It looked strange, too low, too plain, too much like a root cellar someone tried to live in. But Elisabeth wasn't asking for opinions. She was working. By the time the first snow fell in early November, the hut was sealed, the chimney drawing clean, the door fitted tight. Inside, it smelled like wet plaster and would smoke. The stone walls were cold to the touch. But that would change. What Elisabeth built wasn't a cabin. It was a thermal battery. Every decision she made came from one principle her husband had repeated over and over. Stone holds heat. Wood does not. The walls were the key. 18 inches of stacked fieldstone, mostly granite and sandstone pulled from the creek bed, set in lime mortar with a narrow air gap between the inner and outer layers. That gap wasn't insulation in the modern sense, but it slowed conductive heat loss and gave moisture a place to escape without rotting the structure. The mass alone was staggering. Rough estimate, 12 tons of stone in those walls. 12 tons that would absorb heat all day and radiate it back all night. The hearth sat dead center, not shoved against an exterior wall where half the heat would bleed straight outside. It was a low firebox, just 2 feet wide, designed for a bed of coals rather than big logs. Tomas had called this kind of setup a batch burner. You feed it once, let it burn down to embers, and the mass does the rest. Above the firebox, Elisabeth built a simple stone hood to catch smoke and guide it up the chimney. The chimney itself was double-walled, an inner clay liner surrounded by stone, so escaping heat would warm the rock instead of vanishing into the sky. The floor mattered too. Instead of a joist that let wind whistle underneath, she laid the floor directly on compacted sand and gravel. No air gap, no cold drafts. The ground itself became part of the thermal system. Stable, insulated by earth, impossible to freeze as long as the room stayed warm. She positioned the whole structure facing southeast, with one small window on that side to catch morning sun. The north and west walls, the sides that took the brunt of Montana wind, had no openings at all, just stone. To someone used to log cabins with big fireplaces and with floors, it looked backward, wrong, like she didn't know what she was doing. But here's what she understood that they didn't. A log cabin with a big fireplace loses 60 to 70% of its heat up the chimney and through the walls. You're not heating the cabin. You're heating the forest. You burn wood all night just to stay alive, and the moment the fire dies, the cold rushes back in. A stone structure with thermal mass works the opposite way. You burn a moderate fire for a few hours. The stone absorbs the heat, and then it radiates that warmth back for 10, 12, even 16 hours. Slow, steady, even when the firebox goes cold. Elisabeth wasn't guessing. Tomas had built structures like this in the old country, bread ovens, bathhouses, homes. He'd seen how a clay and stone oven, once heated, could bake bread all day on a single firing. The principle was the same. The modification wasn't radical. It was just quiet. No one stopped by to admire the work. No one asked questions. A few neighbors commented in passing. Odd-looking place. Looks like a shed. Won't that be dark inside? She nodded, smiled, kept working. By mid-November, the hut was finished. Stone set, roof shingled, door hung. A small woodshed attached to the south side, where she stacked split pine to dry under cover. It didn't look like much, but it was ready. No one tried to stop Elisabeth. They just didn't take her seriously. When she lit the first fire in the central hearth, a neighbor named Samuel Pruitt rode by and saw smoke rising from the odd little chimney. He reined in his horse, looked at the squat stone structure, and said, "That going to be warm enough for winter, Mrs. Karnak?" "I believe so," Elisabeth said. Pruitt grunted. "Looks more like a smokehouse than a home." He wasn't being cruel, just honest. To a man used to tall log cabins with big fireplaces and high ceilings, the hut looked cramped, dark, and joyless, like something you'd build if you'd given up. Another neighbor, a carpenter named Hollis Wade, stopped by a week later with an offer to help finish it proper. He had extra logs, he said, could frame up a real cabin by Christmas if she wanted. "I appreciate it," Elisabeth told him, "but we're settled." Wade looked at the stone walls, the low roof, the single small window. "Settled," he repeated. Then he shrugged. "Well, you know where to find me if it don't work out." The mockery wasn't loud. It was subtle, passing comments. Quiet laughter at the trading post. Conversations that stopped when she walked in. Heard the widow's living in a stone box now. Probably cost her more in labor than just buying firewood. Can't imagine it's healthy for the children. No light, no air. No one said it to her face, but word traveled. The story became a kind of joke. The Czech widow who thought she knew better than men, who'd survived a dozen Montana winters. Even the women kept their distance. Building a home, real building, with stone and mortar, that wasn't women's work. It made people uncomfortable, like she was trying to be something she wasn't. Anna heard it at school. A girl named Clara told her, "My pa says your ma's too stubborn to ask for help." Anna came home that day and asked, "Mama, why don't we have a cabin like everyone else?" Elisabeth was feeding the fire, adding 2 split logs of coals. The stone around the hearth was already warm to the touch, even though the fire was small. "Because," she said, "we have something better. Joseph. too young to understand the gossip, just like that the floor wasn't cold. He sat on the packed earth near the hearth, playing with wooden blocks Tomas had carved. In most cabins, children couldn't sit on the floor in winter. Too cold. But here, with the ground insulated by depth and warmed by the hearth above, it was comfortable. No one invested energy trying to convince Elisabeth she was wrong. There was no dramatic confrontation, no authority figure showing up to lecture her. Just indifference. The assumption that she'd figure out the hard way. Winter was coming. She'd see. By early December, light snow had fallen 3 times. The hut's thick walls held steady. Elisabeth burned one small fire in the morning, another in the evening. The stone soaked up the heat. At night, even hours after the fire died, the walls radiated warmth. She used less than half the wood her neighbors did. But no one noticed. Not yet. December 14th, 1883. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in 4 hours. By nightfall, it was 6 below zero. By midnight, 15 below. The wind came roaring out of the northwest at 40 miles an hour, driving snow horizontal, piling drifts against every north-facing wall in the valley. This wasn't a normal storm. This was the kind of cold that killed livestock, split trees, turned cabins into traps. In most homes, the fight started immediately. Families stoked fires high, burning log after log to keep the main room above freezing. But the wind sucked heat straight up the chimneys. Drafts howled under doors, through cracks between logs, around window frames. No matter how much they fed the flames, the cold crept in. Samuel Pruitt burned through half a cord the first night and woke the frost on the inside of his walls. Hollis Wade's cabin, tight, well-built, with a stone fireplace he was proud of, couldn't hold heat past 10 feet from the hearth. His children slept in layers, huddled together under every quilt they owned. By the second day, the storm hadn't let up. The temperature hit 22 below. The wind kept screaming. And something worse started happening. Firewood was running out. Most families kept a few cords stacked outside, under tarps or in open sheds. But the snow buried it. The wind soaked it. And wet wood, at 20 below, won't burn. It smolders, smokes, chokes a chimney, and gives almost no heat. Men went out in the blizzard, desperate, trying to dig through drifts to reach dry wood. Some succeeded. Some didn't. Frostbite took fingers. Panic set in. By the third day, people started checking on each other, riding through snow to make sure neighbors were still alive. That's when they noticed Samuel Pruitt, hauling an armload of half-frozen wood back to his cabin, saw smoke rising from Elisabeth Karnak's chimney. Thin smoke, steady, like she was cooking breakfast, not fighting for survival. He stopped. Her woodshed, attached to the south side of the hut, was barely touched. She hadn't been out cutting, hadn't been hauling. The snow around her door was undisturbed except for a single set of small footprints, probably Anna fetching water. Pruitt rode closer. He could hear wind howling over the stone walls, but the hut sat low and solid, anchored into the hillside, like it didn't even notice a storm. He knocked. Elisabeth opened the door, and warm air spilled out. Not scorching, not dry, just warm, comfortable. The kind of warmth you feel in your chest. Mrs. Karnak, Pruitt said, staring past her into the small room. You all right? We're fine, Elisabeth said. Joseph was playing on the floor. Anna was reading near the hearth. The fire in the firebox was barely smoldering, just a bed of glowing coals. Pruitt blinked. You got enough wood? Plenty, she said. He looked at the chimney again. Thin smoke. Almost nothing. How much you burning? 2 fires a day, Elisabeth said. Morning and evening. Pruitt burned more wood in the last 6 hours than she'd used in 3 days. He didn't say anything else. Just nodded, tipped his hat, and rode back through the storm. But the word started spreading. If you're still watching, you need to see what happens next. Hit that like button and stay with me, because the numbers are about to humiliate every expert in the valley. December 17th, 1883. The storm finally broke. The wind died. The temperature crept up to 0. Men emerged from their cabins, exhausted, to assess the damage. Roofs crushed under snow. Livestock frozen. Firewood gone. Some families had burned furniture just to make it through. Hollis Wade had used 11 cords in 4 days. Samuel Pruitt, 9. A family 3 miles south had run out entirely and spent the last night huddled in blankets with no fire at all. And then there was Elisabeth Karnak. Wade was the first to measure it. Not because he wanted to, because he couldn't believe it. He rode up to the stone hut on the 18th, ostensibly to check if she needed help. But really he wanted to see inside. Wanted to understand how she'd survived so easily while the rest of them nearly froze. "Mind if I come in?" he asked. Elisabeth stepped aside. Wade walked into the small room and stopped. It was warm, genuinely, comfortably warm. Warmer than his cabin had been even with the fireplace roaring. He put his hand on the stone wall. Heat radiated from it, not surface heat. Deep, sustained warmth. "When did you last feed the fire?" he asked. "This morning," Elisabeth said. "Around 6. It was past 2 in the afternoon. 8 hours. The firebox was down to ash and a few faint coals, but the room was still 68 degrees. Wade knelt by the hearth, examining the setup. Small firebox. Central position. Stone on all sides. No wasted heat. "How much would you use during the storm?" he asked. "Maybe a cord and a half," Elisabeth said. "Possibly less." Wade stared at her. He'd burned 11. She'd burned 1.5. Same 4 days. Same cold. Same wind. He went outside and counted the logs in her woodshed. Then he came back in and sat down at her table without asking. "Mrs. Karnak," he said slowly, "I need you to explain this to me." So she did. The thermal mass. 12 tons of stone absorbing heat during the fire, radiating it back for hours after. The stone walls holding steady while log cabins bled warmth through every crack. The central hearth position, so no heat escaped to the outside. The deep foundation and packed earth floor, insulated by 3 feet of soil and gravel, keeping the ground temperature stable. Wade listened. Then he asked the question every engineer asks when something works better than it should. "What's the temperature difference?" Elisabeth didn't have a thermometer, but Wade did. He went home, got it, came back. Inside the stone hut, 66 degrees Fahrenheit. Outside, 2 degrees Fahrenheit. Difference, 64 degrees. Inside Wade's cabin, same time of day, for hours after stoking the fire, 52 degrees Fahrenheit. Outside, 2 degrees Fahrenheit. Difference, 50 degrees. 14 degrees warmer. Using 1/7 the wood. Wade sat there with the numbers in his hand. And for the first time, he understood what Tomas Karnak had known all along. You don't heat air. You heat mass. By the end of December, 5 more neighbors had stopped by, not to mock, to ask, how thick are the walls? How deep is the foundation? Where did you place the hearth? How long does the heat last? Elisabeth answered every question, showed them the firebox, the chimney, the wall construction, explained thermal mass in the simplest terms. Stone take a long time to heat up, but once it's warm, it stays warm. The proof wasn't her words. It was the arithmetic. With consumption during the blizzard, average cabin, 9 to 12 cords Elisabeth's hut, 1.5 cords temperature retention after fire dies, average cabin, drops to freezing within 2 to 3 hours Elisabeth's hut, stays above 60 degrees Fahrenheit for 10 to 12 hours of livable space, average cabin, 6 to 8 feet from a hearth Elisabeth's hut, entire room, floor to ceiling the numbers spoke for themselves. Hollis Wade went home and started sketching. Not a copy. He didn't have the skill or stone, but a modification. Thicker walls. Central hearth. Smaller firebox. Samuel Pruitt asked if she'd teach him how to lay stone. By spring, 3 families had started building with thermal mass in mind. The shift didn't happen overnight. It happened quietly, in pieces, over the next 2 winters. Hollis Wade rebuilt his hearth, moved it from the exterior wall to the center of the room, and lined the firebox with soapstone, slower to heat than granite. But once warm, it held for hours. His wood consumption dropped by 40%. Samuel Pruitt couldn't afford to rebuild, but he started stacking fieldstone around his existing fireplace, adding mass wherever he could. It wasn't elegant, but it worked. His family stopped waking to frost on the walls. A Norwegian homesteader named Kjell Anderson heard the story and recognized it immediately. "We built like this in Trondelag," he said. "Stone, thick walls, small fire." He added a baking oven to his cabin's hearth using the same principles. Heat it once, bake all day. By the winter of 1885, the method wasn't Elisabeth's weird hut anymore. It was just how you build if you want to survive comfortably. New families arriving in the valley got advice from the old-timers. Don't waste your time on a big fireplace. Build with stone if you can. Heat the mass, not the air. The phrase, heat the mass, not the air, became shorthand. Everyone knew what it meant. No one threw parades for Elisabeth. No one apologized for mockery. But when people talked about surviving the winter of '83, they mentioned her hut. And when they built new structures, they copied pieces of what she'd done. The woodshed attached to the south side, protecting dry fuel from snow. The deep foundation, insulating the floor from frozen ground. The central hearth, radiating heat in all directions. The thick stone walls, holding warmth through the night. By 1887, 17 homesteads within 50 miles had incorporated some version of thermal mass construction. Not all of them were pure stone. Some were log cabins with stone hearths and added mass around the firebox. But the principle had spread. People didn't call it Karnak's method or give a fancy name. It was just common sense, proven by crisis. And Elisabeth, she kept living in her stone hut, raised her children there, heated it with 2 small fires a day. Same as always. When Anna got married in 1891, she and her husband built a cabin with an 18-inch stone wall on the north side and a central hearth. Learned it from my mother, Anna said. The technique became culture, not because anyone marketed it, not because it was trendy, but because it worked, and work was all that mattered on the frontier. Survival wasn't about being right. It was about being warm in February. The frontier wasn't a test of strength. It was a test of efficiency. You could burn 10 cords of wood and barely stay warm, or you could build smart and burn 2. You could fight the cold every night, or you could store heat in stone and let physics do the work. Thermal mass isn't magic. It's just patient engineering. Heat moves slowly through dense materials. Stone, clay, brick. They soak up warmth and release it over hours, sometimes days. The pioneers who survived best weren't the ones with the most resources. They were the ones who understood how heat actually works. Elisabeth didn't invent this. Tomas learned it in Europe, where stone construction had been standard for centuries. The Russians had their masonry stoves. The Koreans had andal floors. The Finns had heat-retaining fireplaces. Cultures that faced brutal winters figured out the same truth. Mass hold heat better than air. But on the American frontier, where wood was cheaper than stone and speed mattered more than longevity, that knowledge got lost. People defaulted to what was fast and familiar. Log cabins, big fireplaces, endless cords of firewood, until someone like Elisabeth showed them there was a better way. The lesson isn't just about heating. It's about looking at what works, not what's normal. Modern builders still make the same mistake. We insulate, we seal, we add layers, but we don't add mass. We rely on active heating systems that quit the moment the power goes out. We've traded resilience for convenience. A stone wall heated by the sun, or a small fire will radiate warmth all night. A furnace dies the second the gas line freezes. The pioneers knew something we've forgotten. The best survival systems are the ones that don't need you. Now I want to hear from you. Drop a comment and tell me, where are you watching from and what's the coldest winter you've ever faced? And if you got value from this story, if you learned something that might actually matter when the heat goes out, subscribe. Every week, I bring you one technique that worked when lives depended on it. Because the best survival wisdom isn't new. It's just been buried under 150 years of forgetting. See you next time.